Very good evening, everybody. Candid conversations from lockdown. And it is Thursday evening, I think. And this is episode number 19. We do hope that you are enjoying the series. We've had lots of positive feedback. We enjoy the feedback. We enjoy the comments. Please share these videos. And let's get these legends of show jumping through to a much larger audience. Before I introduce my guest for this evening, don't forget about our competitions, the Ken Farrington Skipping Challenge, 2,000 Rand up for grabs, courtesy of Equipage. And then, of course, the Hobby Horse Derby competition, also there sponsored by Equipage. And there you can win a whole 5,000 Rand. Remember, it's the most likes, the thumbs up on YouTube, on our YouTube page, that will walk away as the winners. We have extended the closing date. So originally it was to be tomorrow, that's Friday. We've now extended it to Monday. Bearing in mind the lockdown has been extended, so I mean, why not? What else have you got to do? So that does it for those who haven't had the opportunity to get their submissions in. It's not too late. So Monday at 9 o'clock is the closing date. Right, so on to conversations from lockdown. My guest this evening, he's been in the wilderness for a little while. We haven't heard from him in, it's safe to say, many years. But before he left show jumping, wow, what a mark he left on the sport. An absolute legend of the game, big time winner. And I don't say this lightly, possibly one of the world's best in his day. Very good evening, Louw. How are you?
I'm great, Aidan. It's very good to be with you.
Now, before we get into your wonderful career, tell us, where are you? What have you been busy with this long time since you left show jumping? 30, 35 odd years, is it?
Yeah, about 36 years, I think it is, 37, something like that. Yeah,
What
I
have
now
you been up
live.
to?
Sorry?
I say, what have you been up to?
I now live in Umkomaas, which is about 50, 60 k's south of Durban, on the beach. We started a scuba operation here 30 years ago. And I started, my son Brett used to help me over the weekends, and he subsequently took it over and built it up into an amazing business, bought a guest house, and he sold in January of this year. But at that time, we were 95% internationals and ran a really good business. We owned 5 boats and everything else that went with it.
Absolutely wonderful. Did you always have a passion for the sea?
No. If I could scuba dive, anyone can scuba dive. I was definitely not a natural, but I got persuaded to dive by my then wife, who dived, and it's turned into a great opportunity for us and a great business venture for us. And yeah, so that was wonderful.
It's such a privilege, such an honor for me to talk to you, because you really, I mean, I didn't say it lightly when I introduced you as one of the all-time greats. You really were. There are multiple derby wins. There's overseas campaigns. I want to hear about it all, Mickey. So let's go right back to the beginning and tell me how it all started. How did you get into horses?
My folks, who were wonderful people, were typical Joburg people, and we went for a drive most Sunday afternoons. And we ended up by going past a riding school very often. And I was fascinated by it. I wanted to go in, and my folks were good enough to take me in, and belonged to a man called Arthur Morton. And he was wonderful. He was an older man, and he was great to me. My folks were great to me in that they made a lot of personal sacrifices to enable me to ride, because they weren't moneyed people. And I rode with Arthur for probably 4 years, until he died. So I started with him, I don't know, 48, 49. That's giving my age away.
How old were you at the time?
I was 5 at the time. Okay. So yeah, so I'm an old man. I'm 76. And so I rode with Arthur for those 5 years or thereabouts. And then I moved further down. For all of you guys up there, the riding school was close to where Macro and all of those things are at Spaghetti Junction today. And Leslie Taylor Barry's father had a riding school there, and I went there when Arthur died. And he had his riding school roughly where all those office parks are now. And I rode
you were about, when you joined Leslie, you were about 10 or so?
I was probably about 10. I rode in my first show when I was 9. Yeah. But whether that was with Arthur or with Leslie, I can't tell you. But Leslie, again, was great. And certainly Leslie must go down as the doyen of South African instructors. I don't believe we've had an instructor before him or after him who was nearly as good as he was. Many, many of the great riders went through Leslie's hands, either for a short time or for a long time. And he was, as I said, he was great to me. I rode a lot of bad horses, a lot of decent horses. And I learned a lot by riding all these bad horses. I fell off a lot, but I learned a lot. So he was wonderful to me.
What was it that made him so good? I mean, what was his philosophy? What kind of things was he strong on that he insisted that his riders take on?
He was a pretty strict disciplinarian, and we all had to do things that he wanted us to do. Like if you weren't sitting up straight, he would just put a stick between your elbows behind your back to keep your back straight. And we spent lots of time riding without stirrups, jumping without stirrups, put us in the lane, and we'd jump without stirrups, jump without saddles. We did all those sort of things, and he wanted it to be done the way he wanted it, and we learned pretty well the hard way. We either kept the pace with it, or we bailed. And funny enough, when I was with him, there were 3 Michaels in the class. One stayed Michael, one became Mike, and I became Mickey. And that's where I got my name from, because I was Michael.
And Mickey, did you have your own ponies with him, or were you riding horses out of Leslie's yard?
I rode horses out of Leslie's yard, and then I bought a pony called Pippin from a lady called Judy Black. I must have been, I don't know, 12 or 13 at the time. And so that was my first pony that I owned. And he was great. I mean, he'd been with Judy for some years, and he was a great schoolmaster. As soon as I started being clever and telling him what to do, then he didn't enjoy it. And I ended up selling him, and I bought another pony called Topper. And he was again wonderful to me. And I sold him some years later to Dickie Myberg, who was one of the top juniors at that time.
Outside of the riding school, where were you going to school? Were you playing any other sports, or were you just primarily focused on riding? So it was school and riding.
I was at Athlone High in those early years, and I played cricket and rugby and tennis, and I did all sports. I ran, but my prime thing was show jumping. And I used to ride, I think it was Tuesdays and Thursdays, and then Saturdays and Sundays. And then I went to Hyde Park High, where I finished my education. But again, show jumping was pretty well all-consuming.
So you were a pretty successful child rider. You moved up into the juniors. Did you take your ponies up into juniors, or was it the changeover onto horses?
In those days, we didn't have juniors. At 16, you became an adult. So it was straight children to adults. And yes, I took Topper through to adults, but not too many years later, I sold him to Dickie, and I bought a horse. But again, he was great to me. He won a lot of competitions. Yeah, he was wonderful.
Who was the carry on?
Sorry?
Carry on.
I was always lucky or fortunate in that I had wonderful owners. And in those early days, Harry Amler had 2 horses, Trigger and Jerigo. which I started riding, and I won my first SA championship in, I think it was 63 with Jariga. So I was 20 at the time. And I rode for him for some years. And then I had other great owners who supported me, particularly Tony Wilson. And before that, Tim Finesse, who trained for the Oppenheimers. And then Tony Wilson, who was a wonderful man from Anglo. And Tony was just wonderful. I think he got conned into giving me a horse because he bought this horse who was going to become his hunter. And my mom persuaded him to send it to me to teach it how to show jump or teach it how to jump so they could take it hunting. We did drag hunting in those days. And well, he never got it back. And that was Torchstein, who was a legend himself. He won 3 derbies, won the South African Championship, etc., etc.
But Torchstein wasn't the first great horse that you had. I mean, you've just spoken about the one that you won your first South African Championship on. But was Fancy that before Torchstein?
No, Fancy that was after that.
Okay, so after you won your first South African Championship, then was Torchstein. He came on the scene.
Yeah, well, that first championship was in 63, I think. But then in 66, I went to ride in England. And so I was there for 18 months, and I had an amazing horse called Trigger Hill. I went to ride, well, go back a step. Jack Talbot Ponsonby, who was the manager of the British team, was building courses at the Rand show. And he was impressed with my riding. At the show there, I won the Transvaal Championship on a horse called Arrow, who belonged to June Peterson. And Jack was impressed with my riding. And he asked if I'd like to ride overseas. I said yes. He went back and he managed to get me a job with a man called Len Carter. And so I went to England to ride Len's young horses. And I'd been there 2 or 3 weeks. I had to serve a month's residency qualification. And Len said to me, see that horse over there in the paddock? Yeah. Well, you can ride him if you want to. Who's he? No, he's an older horse. He stops and he falls. But if you want to ride him, you can. Well, I was 22. I wasn't scared of too much. So we started him. And all I did was take off his standing martingale and ride him with a running martingale. And 2, 3 weeks later, I rode him in a show. And the next week we went to White City, which was one of England's 2 CHIOs. And the first competition was the Horse and Hound Cup. There were 147 horses in it, and 21 qualified that night, including many internationals like Seamus Hayes and all the top British riders. And so I was beside myself that I managed to qualify for the 21 finalists that night. And I ended up by winning the class, which was amazing. I'd never dreamed that I was going to win a class at White City, which presented its own problem, because here I was, this unknown South African who'd won this class. They didn't have de-stem, and they were playing national anthems. So in the end, they decided to play God Save the Queen, seeing that I was on a British horse. Well, next time I won a class, they had de-stem.
And what level was that show? You said it was a CHIO show. So top level, we're talking big stuff.
No, that's the top level. It's a top, or it was in those days, I don't know what they're called today, but it was the top level of international shows. They have 2 in England, or had at that time, which was White City, and Wembley, which was the Horse of the Year show at the end of the year.
And had that horse Trigger Hill, had he had an outing with you before? Or was that your first outing?
We jumped in one show before, a smaller show, where I think he won the class up, won it or was second or third. But yeah, but he stood in a paddock for 18 months, not being ridden, because he was a problem in that, as I said, he stopped and fell. And he was joint victor ladorum at that show. He finished second in the King George, which was the premier class for men in the world at that time. He was third in the John Player Championship. And then 2 or 3 weeks later, we went to Ascot, where they had the most valuable class in England, which was sponsored by News of the World. And it was a £2,000 class, which was a lot of money in those days. And Trigger Hill ended up winning that as well. So that was unbelievable. And I'm told that the commentators, when I came into the jump off, they said I had no chance because I was so inexperienced and so on and so forth. So it was a big turn up of the books that I actually won the class. And Len, my boss, his mates, I'd had the first fence down in a couple of classes, a couple of jump offs. So he wouldn't watch it. And his mates, he turned his back and he said to his mates, "Tell me if he clears the first jump." And so they said, "He's coming through the start." And then there was silence. "Has he cleared the first fence?" "Yes, and the second too." And then he was able to turn and watch the rest of the round. But he was an amazing man. Len, I'm sure you don't know him, but there might be some of the people out there who've heard of a horse called Stroller, who was ridden by Marion Oakes, and he produced Stroller. So he was renowned as the best person in England at producing young horses. And I was unbelievably lucky that this man who actually had not shared too many secrets with too many people really taught me what was going on, treated me like a son, and explained so many things, taught me so many things. It was an amazing experience.
Why? Surely that would have opened up doors for you and the temptation to stay on. I mean, if you wanted to be a professional equestrian, that's where you had to be. Why did you decide to come back?
Well, I'd made arrangements to be there for 18 months. And yes, I was offered a lot of good horses to stay on. And I was actually offered horses to ride steeplechasing, national hunt during the winter. And I was pally with some of the top jockeys, Terry Biddlecombe, Josh Gifford, David Mould. And I chatted with them and I found out how little money they earned in relation to the flat racing jockeys and how many bones they broke and how many miles they did a year. In tiny little England, they would do as many as 60,000 miles driving to shows in a year. So I decided, no, that wasn't for me. I didn't want to break that many bones. And I don't know, I just decided I was going to come back. I'd been there for 18 months, and that was what I'd originally intended. And I came back. But then, 4 years later, they turned most of the top British riders professional. And the Olympic Games were strictly amateur in those days. My mother was English. I was then married to Sue. And I was asked to go over there and to ride for the British team. So Sue and I took a trip over there. We had a wonderful time. I was offered a lot of amazing horses. The rand was strong, so we were able to, in inverted commas, sell our property near Fourways and buy a property in England. And we then decided that if I could make enough money in 5 to 10 years to retire back in South Africa, that I would do it. It was wonderful to be going to ride in the Olympic Games, but it was no real special attraction for me to ride for England. Yes, to ride for South Africa would have been amazing. So we thought about it, and I decided, wrongly at the time, that we couldn't make enough money to retire. And it was actually when show jumping just took off, and I would have made a lot of money to enable us to make enough that we could retire back in this country. But I didn't do it.
So wait, are you saying that you made the move to England, or you decided against the move to England?
We didn't move. We went over to have a look at everything and to see what the opportunities were and see what horses I was offered and so on. And on the way back, we decided, we actually went to Spain on holiday. And when we were in Spain, we chatted about it a lot and decided, no, we would come back to this country.
Mm, mm.
No
So you
regrets
came
at all.
back. You came back to South Africa. So let's talk about the first time you came back to South Africa after that initial 18-month period. When you came back then, what happened? Where were you based? Were you back in Joburg? And is that when Torch Sign came along?
I was in Joburg, yes. I had a horse called Marlon, who David Stubbs had ridden for me whilst I was in England. And that was it. So I had to start from scratch. And I decided that I would stay as a professional horseman. I had job opportunities, but I didn't take any of them. And I stayed on as a professional equestrian. And Marlon, I think, won the championship, I don't know, 68 or something. In Kimberley, he won the South African Championship. And at that sort of time, Tortsign would have come to me. And Tortsign just was amazing. I mean, he was a 9-time winner, so he was a very successful racehorse. And as I said, Tony never got him back because he was too good. And he just went through the grades very quickly. And he won the Derby 70, 71, 72. Those were only 3 times that he jumped in the Derby. And then in 73, he won the South African Championship and we retired him. And he came up to Joburg. Well, I'd moved to Durban. He went up to Joburg and became Tony's hack.
Mm. Tell me about those derbies that you won, because was the Derby in its infancy years then? It was a relatively still new competition, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, it was still at Inanda.
Yeah.
It hadn't moved out to Kyalami. And in 70, I think the first Derby was about 66 or something like that.
Mm.
And in 70, there'd been no clear rounds in the Derby. That year there were 5. Wendy Grayson had 2, I had 2, and Theo Laros had 1. And I won it in the jump off. So, you know, when I think back in the Derby in those days, we always thought there would be 1 clear round. If there were more than that, you were surprised. And it had, for me, it had pluses and minuses because I normally was either top qualifier or nearly the top qualifier. So if someone jumped a clear round before me, it actually did take the wind out of my sails to an extent, and that I didn't think there could be 2. Sometimes there were, but it put a lot of pressure on whoever was above that person who jumped a clear.
Mm. And so the first that first year, 4 go into the jump off, you come out on tops. The next Derby you won, was that on a clear? Were you the only clear that year?
I'm pretty sure that I won all 3 on a clear, but I wouldn't swear to that. And I think there was 1 other jump off, and the other one that I just won outright. Mm. But I mean, he was simply amazing. I mean, in the Derby, he just never put a foot wrong, and he was an incredible horse.
Well, tell me about him, because not many of these viewers, the younger generations, will remember him. 3 Derby wins. He was a thoroughbred. What was his pedigree? What was his type, the shape and make of him? Big horse, little horse, blood horse, sensitive. What was he like?
He was a very, very placid horse. Nothing actually upset him. He was by signification. I don't recall who he was out of, but he was bred by JGH Swanepoel. And as I say, he won 9 races. He was just such a placid horse, such an even-tempered horse. He wasn't big, but then none of my horses were big. The only horse that I rode consistently that was more than 16 hands was Fancy That. The rest of them were all under 16 hands. Trigger Hill, 15-1 1/4, by a thoroughbred stallion out of a pony mare. The other horses, Tortsign, Xenophon, Appraise, etc., were all thoroughbreds, but under 16 hands. And Tortsign was just so ordinary, so as a person, as a horse, he just did his own thing. And he was very well made, he was very sound. We never had a problem with him going unsound.
Why the decision to retire him? Because you retired him quite early. I mean, he wasn't at the end of his career. He had a lot left in the tank.
He was about 13 at the time, and actually, when he won his third derby at the cocktail party that night, Tony and I had a chat. He belonged to Tony Wilson, as I said. We had a chat, and I said to Tony, or he said to me, it would be a tragedy for him to go in another derby and get beat when he's won 3 in a row. So the decision was made then for him to retire. But he was already then booked to go to Maritzburg for the SA Champ and to Lorenzo Marx to ride in the big show there. So at that time, at the party, I said to Tony, do you want to stay in the game? And he said, yes. I said, what do you want to buy? He said, whatever you want. So I went over to Theo Larosse, who owned Xenophon, who had stopped 3 times in the derby. And I said to him, do you want to sell? Yes. How much? He told me. I said, right, he's mine. You don't want to try him? No. You don't want to vet certificate? No. And he went back to Durban with me the next day. And he won the derby in 77. So he achieved what we bought him for. And he won a lot of other classes as well. And he became an unbelievable speed horse. He must have been, in my opinion, the best speed horse in the country. When I then started, he started off in the top end, but then I downgraded him a bit when I had Courthouse and Fancy That, as well as whoever else was there.
I just want to go back to that cocktail party. So you're saying that night you retired him because you spoke that he was going to go to Lorenzo Marx and Maritzburg. Did you subsequently jump those shows, or was the Derby winners cocktail party the night he jumped no more? Was that it? Was the Derby the last thing that Tortsign jumped?
Well, the decision was made that he wouldn't come back to the Derby.
Oh, okay.
But he was committed to go to Maritzburg, where he won the SA Champ, and to Lorenzo Marx, where he won, I think, 3 classes, including the big classes. And so then he was retired, finished, done. And he never had a saddle on his back apart from Tony riding him around.
Do you recall his full record? How many SA Champs? How many Grand Prix? We know 3 Derbies. We know at least 1 SA Champs.
He won pretty well all the Derby, all the Grand Prix, and all the Victor Durhams. I don't recall exactly how many, but I think he won like 50 odd top grade classes. He was pretty well unbeatable. He was so placid, nothing upset him. And I remember in the jump off of the SA Championship against Wendy Grayson with King Cole, I mean, I turned him into the second last fence, which was a very, very big spread, an enormous spread. I think it was bigger than he could jump. And he somehow managed to keep his legs out of the way. And so I won it in the jump off. I don't recall, I'm afraid, the centimeters and so on. Yeah. But it was like 5'6" in front and 5'9" behind and 2 meters wide. It was a very, very big jump.
Were there any chinks in his armor, or was he the complete package as a jumping horse? Was he just complete? The technique was all there. There was no work that you had to do on him, or was he a horse that behind the scenes there were little weaknesses that you had to work on?
Absolutely nothing. I would never have jumped him in a power jump of puissance, because I think that was beyond him, and he was too careful. He would have hurt himself if it got over 2 meters. But apart from that, he was just wonderful. Nothing worried him, as I say. He just got on and did his job.
Now, you've told the story that at that cocktail party, Theo Larosse hadn't had a good day in the Derby, was feeling a little bit down in the dumps. You probably took a little bit of advantage on that. You approached him with some money in your hand and said, right, do you want to sell the horse and he was yours. Tell us about Xenophon. Was he a stopper, or was that maybe the partnership between Larosse and the horse that wasn't quite working? Did you have to work on the horse's confidence to get him to win again? Because you know he was stopping, as you said.
Yeah, Xenophon for all of his career, he could put in a nasty stop. He was very good, yes. I had to try to get his confidence back. I had to form a relationship with him, which I did. But I always was aware that he could throw in a nasty stop. So I had to be cautious about that. He didn't do it too often, but sometimes he would do when it was least expected. But he was a very, very good horse.
Was there a reason why he would ever stop? I mean, as in if you were on a long one, or if you chased him, or if you dropped the support, how did he like to be ridden?
I think he just was a bit cunning. He'd stopped enough that he was cunning, and he would take advantage sometimes. You know, I always rode pretty loosely, if I can put it like that, in that if you look at any photos of me, you'll see that I don't have direct contact with the horses' mouths. So I would put them at the jump and I would rely on them to get to the other side. So if he wanted to be clever, he could duck, and there was very little that I could do about it. But he was, I won't say he was genuine, because he wasn't. Torchan was unbelievably genuine, but Xenophon was not. But he was nonetheless a very good horse, and he won Transvaal Championship, he won the Natal Championship, he won a number of Grand Prix. He was very, very good.
And your Derby record with him? I say your Derby record with him. How many Derbies did you jump?
Well, he must have jumped in 2 or 3 or 4 Derbies, and he won the one. He was second or third a couple of times. So he had a very good track record at the Derby, but only the one win. Well, only one win. Was still very good.
Yeah. So that was your 4th Derby win. So you're a 4-time Derby winner.
Yeah.
Do you have one win that's any more special than the others? Your 3rd win maybe on Torch Sign, or?
I think that first one probably stands out. In that there hadn't been a clear round, and then I had 2, him and another horse called Foxfire. The 2 of them jumped clear rounds, and so it was quite a feat to actually jump a clear round after that history. And you know, the thing about the Derby which stands out is that you all know from year to year what to expect, and we still go and make mistakes. And it's not like any other competition where you don't know what the course is going to be. At the Derby, you know what the course is going to be. You know where the fence is going to be. You know what color they are and how big and how small they are. But still, the clear rounds are very few and far between. Also, because you are pressured on time. You had 120 seconds, I think it was, and you were always close to the time. So you were under continual pressure to keep going, to not let your pace drop so that you didn't get time faults.
Was there anything, Mickey, that frightened you about the Derby? Did you ever get nervous from it? Some of your if there was one bogey fence, perhaps that you were, oh, I got to get there. When I get to that fence, that's my nemesis. Or did you take it all in your stride?
It was all in my stride. Funny enough, the steps were always a mental problem to me, as to go up in 1 stride or 2 strides. And I always went up in 2 strides. And I was never sure whether I was doing the right thing or not. I never knocked it, but I was always concerned about that. And then the style in those days had 2 trees growing next to it. So you had this little narrow fence with a tree growing each side. So you had to be spot on for it. And then you jumped the water, and the wall was suddenly upon you. And then you rushed around the corner for the double of gates. And so many people were clear until then. And then had a mistake at the double of gates. And the last fence was this great big oxer with little narrow wooden poles or timber poles, fence, tree poles. And I mean, that again, you weren't assured of a clear round till you went through the finishing posts and you saw what your time was. There was pressure on right from the start to right to the end.
Were you ever out of puff in the Derby yourself as a rider? Because it's a long way to go.
I was a lot younger than I am now and a lot fitter, and I weighed a lot less. So no, I was all right.
Getting back to Xenophon for the breeding enthusiasts out there, also a thoroughbred, and if so, what was the pedigree?
He was also a thoroughbred. His racing name was Drawer. I can't remember who he was by, but Drawer was his racing name. So yeah, he was a thoroughbred. And then,
and
of
proper
course, after
scope.
that
I mean,
came,
he was a proper jumping horse. He had the scope. The reason I say that is because other people that we've interviewed on great horses that have won derbies have said perhaps they had to generate a little bit of the scope on the thoroughbreds by a little bit more canter, a little bit of speed. But from where you're sitting, those thoroughbreds had enough scope to jump those big fences.
Oh, for sure. I mean, there was never a problem scope-wise with any of the horses that I rode. And I have a problem with this whole scenario today of the warm bloods, or sport horses as they're called as well, in that people are, in my opinion, missing the boat horribly because of all these thoroughbreds which they are ignoring. And there's no doubt in my mind that the horses of my time, which were 95, 98% thoroughbreds, were never in a problem because they were thoroughbreds. They were either good enough or not good enough, but it wasn't that they were thoroughbreds. You take Trigger Hill, as I said, he was 15 1.25, and he was by a thoroughbred stallion out of a pony mare. And those jumps that he jumped, particularly in the jump off of the News of the World Championship, were enormous. But he coped without a problem. I jumped other common horses there, or whatever you want to call them, Irish horses. And I never for once felt that Trigger Hill was intimidated because of his lack of size, or any of my horses for that matter. You know, I see everyone riding 16.2 and 16.3 horses today. I just shake my head because I don't think it's necessary.
So what you're saying, you know, if they've got the aptitude, they've got the heart, they've got the step, the stride, and the will to do it, they'll do it. It doesn't matter what they don't know what pedigree. They don't know if they're a warm blood or a thoroughbred. You know, if the horse can do the job, it can do the job, is what you're saying.
Sure, they don't know. And you look at it, Aidan, if we took thoroughbreds as we did off the track, who were winners, they proved they were sound, they proved they were athletic, they proved they were intelligent, they proved they were brave. We had things going for us, where if you buy a warm blood who's 2 years old or 3 years old or 4 years old, he's still got growing to do. He still has to go through it all. And maybe he makes it, maybe he doesn't. But I went into the thoroughbred horse business. And when you look at some of the bigger yards, particularly in Europe, they would have as many as 100 2-year-olds in the yard, all bred in the purple. How many champions would they produce? 1 or 2. And they were all bred as well or as anyone else, but only 1 or 2 made the grade. And it's a numbers business. And the same with the warm bloods today, because the thoroughbreds do natural coverings, the warm bloods do AI. The warm bloods can cover, I don't know, I have no idea what the stats are, but 300, 400, 500 mares in a year, the better horses. Where with the stallions, thoroughbred, they cover 100, maybe a little bit more. So the numbers game, if you've got 300, 400, 500 coming from a top jumping sire, numbers game, some of them should make the grade. I have a problem. If I had my time again, I would still support a horse. Not a thoroughbred, not a warm blood, a horse. I had 2 or 3 that weren't blood horses. I had Xenophon, who belonged to Jerry Bernstein, who was a very, very good speed horse. And I had Fancy That, who still holds the South African high jump record at 2 meters 28. And he was recognized by the Europeans who used to come out to compete with us here as the best puissance power horse in the world. Not in South Africa, in the world. He jumped over, 2 meters 15 probably, 20, 30, 40 times. And he was dynamite. We would go to a show and you'd end up with the triple bar and the war as the big fences. And I'd normally win the class at maybe 2 meters 10, 2 meters 20. Then they'd say to me, we'll give you an extra, a lot of money in those days, 250 Rand or whatever, to go another 10 centimeters. I always said, that's fine. And he never had the fence down. They would run out of wool before I had a fence down with him. He was amazing.
Mm. You still hold the South African record for the sloping poles, I think.
That's right, yeah. 2 meters 28.
We've got some footage of that. People must check it out. It's on YouTube.
Yeah, I've seen it on YouTube. And, you know, you can see from him when you've seen him in that, the way his legs go in every direction. And he was known as the Gunda, which was a tractor, because of the way all of this happened. And he set the record at Shongweni Club. And a lot of my friends in those days were racehorse trainers. And they saw this horse doing all these amazing things and running around like a lunatic. And they came up to me afterwards and they said, I don't know what you give your horse, but we want some of that. Meanwhile, all we did was give him B12 to try and quieten him down. We never gave him anything fancy to try and wake him up or anything.
Yeah.
So it was the reverse.
And you said he wasn't thoroughbred.
No, he was not a thoroughbred.
Yeah.
He was an Irish hunter. He was brought out here by the I say Pinnell, but it wasn't Pinnell. The guys from Sunnyside Mushroom. They brought him out and they couldn't ride one side of him. So I bought him from them.
And apart from the puissance competitions, in normal competitions, Grand Prix, was he a good horse? Did he jump the derbies?
You know, he wasn't a great horse. I look back at it and I wonder if I didn't make mistakes, because he would lose his mind if you tried to go fast on him. And I just wonder if I wasn't wrong to try and win classes with him against the clock, where I should have just quietly hacked around and tried to jump a clear round. But hey, he won his fair share of classes. He was in the top grade through winnings and so on and so forth. And the bigger the fences were, the better he was.
Who in your opinion, was the best that you had?
Sure, that would be probably Appraise. Appraise was just amazing, but it's a close competition. Appraise, Short Sign, Trigger Hill. But Appraise was just unbelievable. I saw Appraise, I was running a clinic at Shongweni Club, and I saw Appraise when he was jumping, 50 centimeters. And I said to John Ellis, who owned him there, I said, your horse is amazing. He's just incredible. And John took him through to the junior grades. And then he went to the army and he asked me to ride him. And I said to him, I'll ride him with pleasure, but when you come out of the army, he'll be too good for you. No, that's not a problem. So I rode him, and he was an adult B grade at that time, which is what, jumping 1 meter 40 or that sort of thing. And I took him to Rhodesia, Zimbabwe, and he became an A grade at the top at that time. The next show was in Pretoria, the SA Championship, and he was a new grade A, top grade. And I had, I suppose, Xenophon and Fancy That as well, and probably Courthouse. And I wasn't happy with how one of them were going. And I decided how I would upgrade him and use him in the big class. And I phoned the Ellises and I said, you'd better come up for the weekend. Why? I said, because Appraise is going to win the SA Championship. Ha, ha, ha. At any rate, they came up and he won the SA Championship. So that was amazing. And strange, because he rode in, or I rode him in the championship probably 6 or 7 or 8 times after that, and he never won it again. But he won everything else. He won the indoor Grand Prix 3 times, the outdoor Grand Prix 3 times. He was Horse of the Year 4 years. Missed 1 year, which was when I broke my ankle. And you must remember, we lived in Durban, so we missed a lot of shows. But he won the leading Horse of the Year, which was for the Harry Amler Trophy, who was my first major sponsor. And he was just incredible. And then he got travel sickness in Cape Town. And we had to leave him in Cape Town for about 6 months. And when we brought him back, he was never physically as strong as he had been before. And Brian Baker, our vet, said that he would be able to sort him out for him to jump in the Rand Show and Pietermaritzburg, which was where the SA Championship was, and then we were retiring. But he won the Grand Prix in Joburg, and in the championship I turned him up short to the triple bar and he had the back pole off, but his eye had gone pretty blue, so he'd lost most of the sight in that eye. So that was it. We retired him right then and then. He never had a saddle on his back again. So he didn't go to Maritzburg.
He was another horse,
so
unfortunately. Yeah.
Sorry?
Yeah. No, carry on. I was going to ask you. I was going to ask you his pedigree and also what type of horse. You say also wasn't a big horse.
He was also a small horse. He was bred by the Birch brothers, Jordeville. But he was completely unlike Tortsign in that he was very highly strung. You had to be very careful with him. And you had to treat him with a lot of respect. But unlike Appraise, Tortsign never got faced by anything. But Appraise won the accumulator at Pietermaritzburg, where he jumped the wall at about 1.90 meters. Gave him a hell of a fright. So for 6 months, I had to be very careful with him when he jumped the wall, just to try and get his confidence back. But also, if he came out of the ring and it had a fence, which happened very seldom, he just walked out of the ring and we unsaddled him, and that was that. If he jumped a clear round, which was 90% of the time, you had to keep him away from anyone else, which would kick their heads off. He knew what he'd done.
Yeah.
He was a real character in himself.
Yeah. And you rate him probably your best.
He was probably my best, but time always distorts facts. And because he was the last of my great horses, but he won 88 classes in A grade. He won every provincial title. He won every provincial Grand Prix. He won every provincial Victoria. He was well nigh impossible to beat against the clock. Annalie Vuffenny was about the only person who could beat me against the clock. And that wasn't often.
You mentioned Court Out as well. Was he a good horse or below the strength of those?
Yeah, he was a good horse without being really top of the pops. He won a number of good classes, but nothing that really was unbelievable. I had a number of those sort of horses. When I retired, I had Ace of Spades, who was good but not wonderful. I had Alice Sloper, the same sort of thing. So there were a number of horses I had which were good without being unbelievable.
So those were really the standout ones: Xenophon, Torchsign, Fancy That, Trigger Hill, and Appraise. Well, yeah. It's nice to have so many good ones, huh?
I was very fortunate, which came from having good owners or good sponsors. But
Yeah.
also when I came back from England, as I said, I had Marlon, and that was it. So I bought a horse called Foxfire from Willie Angus. He was 19 at the time. And when I came out to ride in a show during my stay over there, I was brought up by Close, the motor company. And they sponsored when I bought Foxfire. Bought him for R1,000. And they sponsored him. He was the first sponsored horse in this country. He became Close horse, CLOWS horse. So he was the first sponsored horse in this country.
You mentioned earlier
And
that you
things opened
moved.
up.
You mentioned
Sorry?
that you moved to Natal. So you were based in Joburg. When and why did the move to Natal come, when all the serious equestrian sport was always in Joburg?
I was doing a lot of teaching down here, and I wasn't happy with the politics in Joburg. And so I moved down here, but also at that time, you pretty well ended up with all the shows following one another. But then came a thing called television, and they all moved away from each other. So when we moved here, we thought, oh, we'd only go up and spend 6 weeks or 2 months or whatever up there doing the various shows. But it didn't happen. So we were up and down the road as shows moved away from each other to go to the various shows. But I've never regretted the move. I love it down here. And so, yeah, it's been good to us.
What am I prying? Am I prying? What politics are you talking about? Because it still happens today, I guess.
You know, whenever we went up to Joburg for a show, the first person we'd see would say, who's talking to who this week? So let's leave it at that.
So not much has changed.
Yeah.
Mickey, you were a professional horseman. So what does that exactly mean? Does that mean you were dealing, you were teaching, you had a livery yard? How did you structure your business? Or when you moved to Natal, did you have a job and then were riding on the side? Tell me about that.
I had a job most of my life. So I did a bit of dealing, not much. I did a bit of teaching, not much. We had stables, we boarded some horses, but again, not much. I was definitely not a good instructor in those days. I couldn't understand how people couldn't do things. It was so easy for me. Why can't you do that? Now, if I look back at it and I see people today, I would be a pretty good teacher because I can see where people have problems today, which I couldn't in those days. But I worked, I started off as an insurance broker. Bernard McCarty, who was the chairman of what was then the THS, Transvaal Horse Society. I worked for him. I became their bloodstock manager based in Durban, but I did the whole of South Africa and Rhodesia. And then I left him and I joined Chris Smith. And we had a business called Chris Smith Bloodstock. He and myself and Ken Long were the partners. And we had the horse insurance, and Ken did other insurances. And we were bloodstock agents. So I went overseas 2 or 3 times a year to buy horses. And that was great. But it was when the rand was strong and Warren Duplessis allowed you to write off farming losses against other income. So we'd find people who had quite a lot of disposable income and tax problems and buy horses for them and write them down to, I think it was 8 Rand or 15 Rand come 28th Feb. But then he did a mean thing and he ring fenced it. So that was the end of that gap. But I mean, I had done very well out of it. I bought a horse for the Goss brothers of Summerhill Stud called Northern Guest, who became champion sire, champion brood, my sire is something, and so on. Summerhill Stud were champion breeders for 9 years or 10 years in a row, largely as a result of Northern Guest. So yeah, it was good times.
Have you heard that Summerhill is now capital in breeding warm bloods?
I've heard that, yes. Yeah. I hope it works for them.
Yeah. Back to the riding. Where would you say you were a very, very dedicated rider behind the scenes, or you just had that natural flair and talent? In other words, when you were putting in a day at work, would you come home, saddle up 3-4 horses and do the riding and get on with it? Were you in the saddle every day?
Yes, I used to generally ride 2 or 3 or 4 horses before I went to work. But then I was also unbelievably fortunate in that my wife, Sue, now Sue Peters, she ran the stables and she did an unbelievable job. And so much of my success is because of what Sue did for me, to me. I mean, she was unbelievable. I couldn't have achieved half of the success that I did without her there.
Was she also sitting on some of the horses while you were at work? I know that Sue is very diligent because I was trained by Sue as a young boy as well. So I know how fastidious she is. She
didn't ride my horses, but she had an unbelievable horse herself called Precentor, who was an incredible horse. But then when I broke my ankle, which I said earlier, when I started coming back, I was going to jump Xenophon and Appraise in the first show when I came back. And I wasn't able to ride them at that time because my ankle was completely solid when it came out of plaster, didn't move 1 millimeter. And so Sue started getting them ready for me. We had an indoor school and they both pulled like trains. It was the way I liked my horses. And I can remember standing at the top there watching Sue ride them, and she would jump a jump and they would come down and I could see them deciding, am I going to go left? Am I going to go right? And Sue bobbing on the top saying, for God's sake, please go the way that I want you to go. I don't want to fall off. But it was very funny. I don't think she found it funny at the time.
Now, you said yourself you were, if I can use the word, and with no disrespect, unorthodox in your style, because you said yourself you didn't have them on a contact. So you broke a lot of rules, a lot of the rules of the classical way of riding, in that you must always have a contact, your reins must be fairly short, hands in front of you. You weren't of that ilk. You weren't of that style. You were, from what I understand, because I never had the privilege of watching you ride, but on a long rein, I would imagine a little bit like Tony Lewis. Where did that develop from? Because that wouldn't have been a Leslie Taylor. He would have been a very much a classic in the classics.
Yeah, I think certainly my reins were never as long as Tony's, but I always believed, and this came from Len, the guy I worked for in England. He said my job was to put the horse in the place to jump the fence. It's his job to get from this side to that side. So I tried to put them in the right place and then be sympathetic, allow them the softness of my hands, that they could jump and they could bascule without any interference from me to land the other side, and then we go from there. But it's always been my belief, your elbow's always got to be in front of your stomach. As soon as your elbow gets behind you, you've got a problem because you can't control your horse. So it's a minuscule adjustment, if I can put it like that. I never restricted the horse's ability to use his head and neck, and therefore his hindquarters. But so I gave him that freedom, but I didn't have loose reins. If that makes any sense.
Absolutely. Your body control must have been very good there. What are your philosophies behind riding? I mean, what are the principles that you believe in that needs to be there within a show jumping round? Are you one that says it's all about rhythm, it's all about balance? What is your philosophy? When you went into that ring, where was your headspace?
Yeah, it's all about balance, but I think that today too many people have become too machine-like. I don't believe that any fences that are more than 5 strides apart are related. So 5 strides is the max. I could come down to a thing that's 5 strides apart. I could go down in 5, I could go down in 6, depending upon how my horse jumped the previous jump how fast I was going, how long his stride was, and what the next fence was. I see today people walking distances, which are 6, 8, 10 strides. I see them walking around a corner. That is absolute nonsense. You are absolutely incapable of riding that round a corner. And I think that too much of that has got into people's heads instead of them using their own ability to see their strides. There's no way that any of us in those days would have an instructor, I'm talking about the top riders, an instructor walk the course with them, where I see it all over the place today. Not that I go to a lot of shows, I haven't been to shows for a while, but I see it happening all over the place. If you're a top rider, you shouldn't need an instructor to go around and tell you what to do. And it's a situation, I've seen the mistakes where they go down and it's, say, 9 strides. And they count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Oh, where's the jump? And so they make a mistake. Where if they were using their heads to decide and to balance, in my opinion, you land over a fence, you sit into your horse, you collect him, you get him balanced, and you go for the next jump. If you restrict it like a 3 stride, you know how you want to ride those 3 strides. And so you're going to jump the previous fence with that in mind and go down accordingly. But beyond that, you make your own adjustments. Mm-hmm. So in a jump off, if it's 5 strides, you could maybe go down in 4. But then it's because of your own eye that you make that decision.
What do you think it was that made you so good, that made you stand out, that made you win so much, achieve so much, be able to extract so much out of those horses, get the best out of them? What is that? Is that something that you inherently have? Can that be trained?
I was just privileged, and I was given that ability. And I was also lucky in having good owners and good horses. But I was privileged. I mean, I just had that ability. And I was also privileged in going through the hands of Arthur Moulton, Leslie Taylor, and then Len Carter, in that they all gave me things. And they all taught me things to enable me to maximize my ability. And no doubt that a lot of it came from those 3 gentlemen.
When you were riding as an adult, was there ever anybody on the ground helping you, any coaching once you left England, those 18 months that you had in England? Once you moved on, was there any coaching after that, any clinics or?
Certainly there were clinics. I mean, whenever anyone came out here to run a clinic, I went on it. Didn't matter who it was, I went on it. So it's my feeling that if I learned one thing or picked up one thing from the person, it was worth the clinic. But then again, Sue was always on the ground, and I'd say to her, is he doing this, is he doing that, and yes or no. So there was a lot of input from Sue as to when the horses were ready to go into the ring and how good the horses were and so on.
Mm-hmm. Do you miss the sport at all?
Sure, Aidan, I miss it now and again. And I would love to be 30 years younger or 40 years younger. And I've seen some amazing thoroughbred horses. And I would love to be in a position to acquire those horses and bring them on. So I'm convinced that they would be top horses or had the ability to be top horses. And I would have liked to have been in that position.
Now, how old were you when you said goodbye to the sport, and what were the reasons? Because you were at the top of your game, and you just had enough, or you just suddenly departed, left us, and why?
I was 38, 39, and it was when Appraise, we retired Appraise. My other horses were not good enough. They would have taken a couple of years to be good enough, assuming that they would become good enough. Also, my kids were 10 and 8 or thereabouts, and I wanted to spend more time with them. I'm not sure I became a good father, but I tried to. And I was also involved in the racing business at that time. So we would attend race meetings most Wednesdays and Saturdays. And it was just a clash of all those things. And I'd always decided that I would retire at the top. I wouldn't retire when I was just another rider. So Appraise won the Grand Prix at the Rancho, and then retired. I rode until the end of the year, which was the indoor, and then gave it up. I was sponsored by EPOL at the time. They were amazing. Before that, Ford, who were also amazing. So I was privileged to have good sponsors and good owners and good horses.
You were 38 years old when you retired, and have you ridden a horse since then? Have you kept a finger on the pulse?
I've ridden a number of times, not often, but I have ridden a number of times. Sometimes when I was still teaching, which I haven't taught for some years now, I would get onto the horse if I couldn't get them to do what I wanted them to, and I would ride. And yeah, a little bit, but certainly nothing. You know, when I stopped, everyone said, "Oh, why don't you buy a young horse and then bring it on?" I was too competitive, Aidan. I would never have just wanted to bugger around in a small class. I would want to compete, and so then it would start all over again. So no, I've got no regrets for retiring when I did.
Do you remember
Sue
all
very
the time?
kindly. Sorry.
Carry on.
Sue very kindly offered me Precentor, and I rode him at home a few times, but I could see that she wasn't really, I mean this in the nicest way, was really happy with me bullying her horse, which she didn't bully. So I gave him back to her. But he was a great horse, and I'm sure that if I'd continued with him, I'd have had a lot of success with him. But it was better that she kept him.
Do you remember just how much you won, how many South African championships in those 38 years while you were active?
That who did?
I say, do you remember just how many titles you did win, how many South African championships, how many outdoor Grand Prix? I mean, we know about the 4 derbies.
I won 4 South African championships, and I won, I think it was 3 or 4 outdoor and 3 or 4 indoor. They didn't start in the early days of my career. They didn't start, Torts, I never jumped indoors. So it was only later. But I mean, I won all the provincial titles. I won all the Vikla Durhams at all the national shows, the provincial shows. I won all of that sort of stuff. I mean, the one show in Lorenzo Marx, I didn't win on the first day. From the second day on, I won every class. That was like 5 days. I won the big class and the small class every day.
Other competitors in the ring, people that you had a great amount of respect for, knew that those were your, you know, in a jump off, when it came down to it, that person would be the person to beat.
Well, I mean, sure, Gonda was always there, and Gonda was a great competitor, and she won so many wonderful titles and so on. But to compete against the clock, my biggest opposition was, as I said earlier, Annelie Wuffenfenning. I mean, Annelie would be very, very quick, and I was also very, very quick. So that would be my major competition like that. But people like Philip Smith and Peter Levore and Andre Ferreira, there were many people who were really top people. In my opinion, there's no doubt in those days there were more top riders than there are today. And we also had so many of the older people who rode for fun, and it was great to have them in the competitions.
Did you get the chance to represent South Africa? Were there national colours along the way?
I was South African captain for, I don't know, 10 or 12 years or something. I got my national colours, I think 63. and I captained the South African team in Joburg, in Rhodesia, and in Lorenzo Marx, and then in indoor, when we had the indoor competitions and the foreigners used to come out. So I was in that every year until I think a year or two before I retired.
Mm. Were those good fun, those international shows, those indoors when the overseas guys used to come out?
They were a lot of fun, and they also proved how good our riders were, because we were never allowed to ride our own horses. We rode horses we'd never ridden before. And then the internationals obviously were on horses they'd never ridden before, but it evened it up to an extent in that, yes, we'd seen the horses, but we'd never ridden them. And we never got beat. We won every single year. We beat top teams from England, from France, from Germany, from Italy, from America, from Ireland. We beat them all.
Mm.
So our riders were very good.
Mm. Anything on your to-do list that you never achieved? I mean, you never got the chance to go to the Olympics. Are there things that that you would have liked to have done while you were riding that you bowed out a little bit too soon, that you would look back later on life and go, well, that's something I wish I had achieved? Maybe another crack overseas.
Yeah, two things, Aidan, in that the Olympic Games, obviously, and I would have liked to have been in a position to take our horses to Europe and ride our horses in Europe, because I think we would have done extremely well. But when I use my 18 months in England as a yardstick, we would have been as good as any of them there. I think if we could have got a team over there, we would have held on. I'm not saying we would have won everything, but we certainly wouldn't have been disgraced in any of the shows where we rode. As individuals, people like myself and Gonda, I think would have won our fair share. And as a team, whoever the other members were, we would have held our own in team events.
Now, Mickey, obviously the sport has changed a huge amount over the years. The configuration of the courses, the course design has changed. The jumps are a lot more open now. The evolution, the horses have evolved as well. The breeding programs. Do you watch a lot of or any, in fact, show jumping from overseas and see how things have changed? And what are the big things that you see, the big changes that you see, better or worse, and how would you have fared?
I do see some of it, not a lot of it, but in my opinion, it hasn't been a dramatic change. Yes, the fences are normally more related. Yes, they're more open. Yes, there's more emphasis on time. But that's an involvement which wouldn't have been a problem. You know, Harold Preston, who was the course designer most of the time when I was riding, Harold used to build absolute replicas of the top courses in another competition, the Olympic Games or this or that or the next thing. We all did as well as the internationals over those courses. So you had a yardstick there as to how good it was. And yes, there's more emphasis on the open fences and that sort of thing. So horses are going to be a bit more careful. Poor old Fancy, that I'm sure would have had a major problem because he certainly wasn't too careful. But when I look at Appraise and Torchsign, Trigger Hill, they were careful horses in themselves. When I look at other great horses when I was riding, they were careful horses. So I don't think that our top riders from that time would have a problem with today.
When you were shopping for horses, when you were looking around, you obviously had a very, very good eye for a horse. It's what led you into the bloodstock trade as well. But when you were shopping for a show jumper, what did they have to, what spoke to you? Were you looking for a certain type? And then, in your opinion, what makes the ultimate show jumping horse?
Well, I mean, to me, the foremost thing was that they had to be athletic, they had to be brave, they had to be sound, they had to be intelligent. And that came from them winning races. I'm not saying that they have to be 9-time winners like Tortsign, but they had to have some athletic ability. If you look at most of the top sportsmen, they play something, they're a good golfer. They play something, they're good this and that. They are able to cope in different sports. And to me, it's the same with the horses. If they're good race horses, it was a big, big step in the right direction. I like them shortly coupled. I like them with a good shoulder, with a relatively short neck and fairly peacocky, and strong quarters and deep in themselves. So, yes, but if they weren't decent racehorses, I don't think I bought any which I didn't think were decent racehorses. If you look at Appraise, he was a 2-time winner, but then he went in the wind. He was one of the first horses to be hobdayed. But he was a decent racehorse till he went in the wind. So that was pretty well the picture that we looked for.
So you would never look anything that never got out the maidens?
I'm not saying I wouldn't, but he would have to have plenty of other plus factors, in that I'd probably want him closely related to someone else that I liked a lot. But it would be a negative to start with, and I would go from there.
So getting back to our discussion earlier, you think racing is a good yardstick because it measures a lot of things. It measures where the horse is head at. Has it got a competitive spirit? Does it have athletic ability? And this might be a way for anybody who doesn't have big budgets to go to the sales, to shop for a warm blood. These are things that possibly could help you along the way finding a decent horse in the ring that comes from thoroughbred lines.
Yeah, but you know, that unfortunately, Aidan, is the same as going to the yearling sales to buy a thoroughbred, a racehorse. You see him walk around and you like him, and he's got a nice pedigree. He doesn't know how he's bred. And so you get him home and he's useless. Because he doesn't know how he's bred, where the next horse hasn't got as good a pedigree, but he's got something here or something here, and he becomes a really good horse. So to me, buying untried horses, whether it's race horses or whether it's warm bloods or sport bloods, whatever they're called today, is a lottery. You try to limit the errors and you take a chance. And sometimes it works, most of the time it won't work. That's the law of averages.
Are you still are you, Mickey, still in touch with any of your contemporaries from back in the ring?
No, I'm not. I don't have any contact with anyone.
Would you ever be open to coming and stepping into a ring again as a coach and helping some people out if you were approached?
Yeah, Aidan, I would. You know, I would enjoy that. Now I'm completely retired. You know, until a few months ago, I was still helping out at the guest house. I would do breakfast for the divers. Now I'm finished. And so, yeah, I'm now completely free and retired. And yes, I would enjoy helping someone or someone's if the opportunity came up. Yes, I would.
I think we might have to get you on a plane and get you to Joburg and get you to cast an eye over some of us. Mickey, it's been a great honor talking to you, an absolute privilege. As I said when we first started off, you are one of the legends of the game. In my opinion, you went far too soon. I said the same thing to Peter Gotts. He also got out of it at a relatively young age. But, you know, you have a wealth of experience that I think the sport could tap into, and that would be a good thing.
You know, talking about Peter, I think he's one of the few people who won the Derby on 4 different horses. So he was something serious. Yeah.
Well, you're one of the legends, Mickey. It's been a great privilege speaking to you. Thank you very much for your time, and I'm sure all your fans out there will enjoy what you've had to say.
Thank you for your time. I've enjoyed the talk. Thank you.
Take